Hey, Paul, hope you're doing well. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, going through every lap, but because we know the line stuff for the most part. There's just a lot that's new with this car, new feelings, stuff like that. So I took down some notes of just like general stuff, and I'll go through one of your better laps, which is actually pretty early in the session, I think. And look at a few little things, but like you talked about, I think braking looks like a struggle to me. That's more of an issue with being comfortable with the shifting in the car. I don't know if how the pedals are exactly. It's hard to tell from the camera whether maybe the spacing between the brake and the throttle is tough to do heel and toe. In a lot of cases, it seems like you're trying to kind of get braking done and then do the shift right at the end or something like that. But we want to make sure that we practice enough or help with how the car pedal placement and that stuff is, so that you can shift it easier and get that done while you're braking, in order to be more efficient, because we don't want to have that coast period where you're trying to do the shift. We want to be able to brake like we were before into the corner, a little bit of trail braking to help it turn. We don't want to have to get done with the braking really early and shorten up our straightaway just to get the shifting done. So that may just come with time, more practice, whatever, but maybe there's something we can do with the car too, just helping get the pedals closer together or whatever, so that you can roll your foot and hit the throttle, and get the shift done. Also, something to consider there is usually it's a little bit easier to do that blip when you're harder on the brake. When you've got more force, your foot is kind of stabilized, that left half of your right foot is stabilized on the brake, and it makes it a little bit easier to roll to the throttle, again, depending on the exact pedal placement. But that may make it a little bit easier if you're earlier in the brake zone, while you're kind of heavy on the brakes, to be able to do that blip and get the shifting done a little bit sooner rather than wait till you're coming off the brake. But let me go ahead and pull up your video and we'll go through a little bit of it. So you're right now braking kind of 3.5 or something, maybe like a little bit of a coast. It's hard to tell exactly, but it sounds like, just going off sound, that you're kind of lifting off throttle and then going to the brake kind of lighter. And we want to compress that, a little bit. We want to make it full throttle until we're absolutely ready to be hard on the brakes. And then it's quick transition to hard brake. And right now it seems like kind of lazy coming off the throttle, lazy going to the brake pedal. So there's kind of like a transition point to the brakes, not like a braking point. So we want to try to compress all that down again, so that we're on throttle longer. And I would say looks like 3 is a pretty reasonable number to be braking at. Maybe 2.5 or something like that, maybe the ultimate like limit. But there's definitely a period up here where you get off the brakes, like somewhere along in here after the one board before the cone, and then you're actually frequently back to throttle kind of right after you turn in and accelerating through. And so in any tighter corner, we definitely don't want to be back to the throttle when we're trying to add steering input, because we're trying to make the front wheels turn. We want to make sure, again, that we're keeping weight on those front wheels. And if we over slow it to a point that we're accelerating back up before we get to the point where the steering's the tightest, then we're taking the weight off of the tires that we're trying to do the work at that point. So we want the braking to end a little bit later. We should start the braking a little bit later. And that way the car will turn a little bit better through here. Otherwise, line and all looks pretty reasonable. No big complaints there. All this looks pretty good. Really all through here even. Once we get up here, I think this is 6. I always forget the numbers, but could definitely go in with a little bit more throttle through here. You're kind of lift, coast, and just kind of maintain through there. Try to go in on throttle and then start breathing out of it slowly as you start to tighten the radius. But yeah, it can definitely carry a little bit more speed entry. This looks pretty reasonable all through here. No big concerns. A couple laps here, a little bit more coast through there, but not bad. Same with all this. Really pretty happy through there. Once we get up here, obviously this is kind of the other big brake zone that we struggle with. And same kind of thing where you kind of ease out of the throttle, lighter to the brake, and then doing the shift real late in the brake zone. You're also starting to kind of drift away from the edge of the road. So rather than staying all the way to the right, past the one board, by the time you're at the end of that little curb, let me see if I can clear that video. By the time you're getting to the end of the curb here, you're almost in the middle of the road. And so when you actually start turning the wheel, then you're inside of the center of the road. And so that makes this a really tight turn that doesn't necessarily need to be quite as much. And you're also starting that turn or kind of creeping into that turn on the flat portion, and then it goes uphill. And so we want to kind of use that uphill, where we're trying to turn the car, but also we don't want to make it any tighter than it has to be. And so while you're kind of creeping in, or while you're finishing out your brake, you don't want to have that creep in and tighten the radius up. And we, again, want to try to get the downshift done a little bit sooner while we're doing the braking. And again, if it helps, trying to do it while you're on heavier braking. But to maximize all the braking potential, we also want to be quicker to the brake pedal. So the slower we get, like if you're doing it like you're just driving up to a street, a stoplight or whatever, where you're kind of easing into the pedal and then adding brake pressure. The problem with that is as you lose speed, you lose momentum in the car, and that's trying to keep that wheel turning. So you're more likely to get a lockup. I'm assuming this car doesn't have ABS, but if you're heavier on the brakes when you're at high speed, you've got a lot of momentum in the car. And so it's much less likely that the tire is going to lock up because you've got all that momentum trying to turn the wheel over. Whereas after, if you slow up with light pressure and then increase as you get towards the end of the brake zone, as you've slowed the car down some, then it becomes easier to get that lockup. And so it's kind of backwards. So we want to be able to do pretty heavy initial brake pressure and then start easing out of it as the car slows down and that momentum goes away. And because of that, we also want to be able to get our downshift done sooner in the brake zone while we have a little bit heavier brake pressure. Obviously not so early that we're like over revving it, but somewhere kind of middle of the brake zone, we want to have all the shifting done so that in that last 25% or whatever of the brake zone, we're only focused on how we release the pedal to carry entry speed, not how do I get off the brakes to do a downshift to then turn it in, because then that just ruins our entry speed. So I know it's all tough when there's a zillion new things happening, but to me the biggest thing I see here is we got to polish up the shifting, or we're never going to get the braking better and the entry speed and all that. So it really takes fine tuning and focusing on all that shifting to make sure that really gets optimized, and then we can improve the rest of it. Again, all the line stuff, really pretty good through here. No complaints. This shorter brake zone without a downshift, you're pretty much right on it. Maybe push a little deeper, but pretty close there. Only little line thing I would say is as you come out of here, don't release your steering quite as early and just go straight to the inside of the next corner. Hold that steering a little bit longer and just get out a little over to the side. So if you hold that steering input and kind of go back just maybe a car length and aim it in this way, it makes you're kind of aiming the car up to the middle of the road over here, and that's where your slower point will be, and that's kind of right before you start the uphill. Whereas if you go straight into the corner, then you've got to slow it down more because you're making it really tight right in here. Right as you get to that corner, it becomes really tight. And so you got to be really slow, and then you just kind of maintain until you go uphill and get more grip again. Whereas if you coming out of this left-hander, you keep bending it a little bit just over to the left and then aim it into the corner, then it's much more straight going through the curb initially, at this first apex. You can let it drift out just a couple feet, and then you'll get all that grip from the uphill, and you can start picking up the speed again. So it'll get you a little bit more entry speed and open up that radius some if you don't just go, beeline it to the first apex here like that. So that's what's making that really tight initially. And then once you get to this uphill, obviously you got all the grip in the world and you get back to throttle really early. You just have to kind of trust where that track gap is. So pretty good through the second half of the corner. And then up here, another struggle point for the downshift. Braking, I would say, looks better, a little bit harder in the brake pedal, but still getting done with it pretty early. You're getting done with that brake pressure in order to do the downshifts as you're going into the corner. We want to make sure those downshifts are done in a straight line, because if you flub it up a bit and don't get the wheel speed matched with the engine speed just right, then if you're turning, it's like pulling the handbrake if you really miss the rev match. So we don't want to rely on the engine kind of matching itself, or we want to help it match the speed, We don't want to try to kind of merge it with the clutch. We want it to already, be at the right speed with the blip. But we want to make sure we do that in a straight line so that we have the least opportunity for upsetting the car. The more you do it in the corner, obviously, the easier it is to get it sideways or something with messed up shift. And then overall looks pretty good through here, again, line wise. The only other thing in this corner while I'm looking at it is the shuffle steering. It's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you have a car with a longer steering ratio. But anything up to about 90 or 100 degrees of steering input, I try not to really move my hands on the wheel. If it's something where the reach is awkward or whatever, and you can't keep that, in this case, your right hand up top as easily, okay, it's not that big of a deal. But I kind of try to pre-position if it mostly with my inside hand. Oh, oops, that was too far. So like in here, as I'm going into the corner, I would reach up with my left hand and have my left hand right about 12 o'clock or whatever, and then hold my right hand about where you have it now, so that I'm keeping my hands on the wheel at the same place all the way through the corner, rather than moving hands over the steering wheel as I go through the corner. I want to have, both hands on pretty firmly on the wheel as I go through the corner, just in case it slides and I got to correct it really quick or something. You don't want to be caught one-handed at some point in the corner. Some of that also is, getting done with the shifting earlier. But when you have, you kind of ended up shuffling your left hand partway through, and then as you come back out, you're kind of shuffling back. Again, it's not like a critical thing, but it is something that the more and more you get to the limit, the more precise and ready you need to be if you do need to make a correction. Let's see what else I have on my notes. This was later in the video, and just kind of to help in the thought process of the racing. Once you got close to this BMW, I guess it was down here. So you let this Cayman go through, and you're catching up to this BMW. Cayman goes by, and if you watch just compared to your other laps, you back off a lot more, even though you're maybe 10 car lengths or something from this BMW. It's affecting how you're driving, and realistically, you shouldn't have to change anything until you get right up on that car. And so it's just something to think about, especially when you get on track in a race with a bunch of other cars. You have to keep your own driving in mind a little bit more, and not just let whoever else affect you. And I can't tell if there's somebody behind you or anything else going on. I know after this you do let another car go through, and so maybe you're watching mirrors a bit, let him go. But even still, even after this, you don't really get back to the same level of push. You're not pushing as hard as you were before. And just from the outside, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you saw that car in front of you and you kind of backed off a little bit. And so I just wanted to remind you to kind of think, your own reference points, your own shift points, keep pushing until you get to that point where, okay, now the guy is actually in my way. He's, a car length or two in front of me or whatever. I can't push my brakes in as deep because I risk hitting him or whatever. You want to be able to keep pushing. And that's a very common thing for people that are starting out racing. Not that this is a race, but it's very easy to say, oh, I'm close to this guy, when really you're 10 or 5 car lengths away or whatever. And it starts affecting your driving and your inputs a little bit. So just have that in mind. Definitely something also, I think I mentioned in an email about the race start, you don't really think about how much you're shifting by ear, but when you get, 2 by 2 in a line of 20 cars or whatever, and they're all making noise when the green flag goes, all of a sudden you're not going to hear your own car. And so you have to be able to use other reference points like attack or shift lights or whatever to make sure that you don't hit the rev limiter or shift too early or whatever. And it's just thinking about, driving in situations that are different than before. You're not driving by yourself, and it's not just the visual cues of a car out in front of you. Sometimes it's the auditory cues of, you're hearing this other louder car, there's a stock car going by or GT1 car going by or whatever. You got to remember your own stuff, and make sure that you don't miss a shift or anything like that. Also, there's somewhere later on, I think it was in like the last lap. I don't know if I'll find it real quick, but I remember you were going down a straightaway kind of by yourself. Maybe it was this one. And you were like looking around in the mirrors as if maybe you didn't see somebody or something like that. Like you took several look around, like there, you're looking all over the place kind of, and maybe there's something else you were thinking of or looking, and thought there was something wrong with the car or whatever. I don't know. But just wanted to make sure that before you get to the race weekend, you're 100% comfortable with the mirrors. I noticed you've got, at least on the right side, one of these circular mirrors, which is good when there's somebody right next to you, but there's not much you can see beyond that. If there's not a car almost overlapped right next to you, it's hard to see them. The wink mirror in the middle is great. Those are obviously have very, very good visibility if it's adjusted well, but just, make sure that you've got good visibility of something you can glance really quick and if people are there. You don't want to have to like search for people in the mirrors if it's in a race situation. Another thing totally outside of driving, but just looking at the cockpit, I noticed up here on the top, don't see any roll bar padding. Maybe there's some further left, but make sure you have some good, SFI padding up there, at least halfway across, and then, whatever bars, and even down around your shin, your leg, or whatever. This down bar on the other side, make sure you got that padded. Just seems obvious, or seems maybe silly. Don't expect to need it. Certainly don't hope to need it, but you're going to be glad it's there if you do need it. I think that's pretty much all my notes. But as far as performance stuff, I would say biggest thing is going to be getting comfortable with the shifting so that then you can maximize your braking, because the braking is always going to be compromised until you do get almost second nature with the shifts. And again, if it means you need a wider brake pedal so it's closer to the throttle, or you can bend the throttle pedal over so it's closer to the brake or whatever, try to make that as comfortable as possible so that you can get that done as easily as possible. And seems silly, but sit in the garage, practice that, give it hard brake pressure like you would need on the track, and see how well you roll over. Is the brake going lower than the throttle, and that's why it's tough to get to it? Is it too high? Do you need to space them away from you at different amounts? That sort of thing. You can make the throttle pedals thicker if you need to get it up some. You can bend the brake pedal arm towards you maybe if it needs to be higher, those sort of things. But just try to make all that stuff as simple as possible to make it easier once you get out there. But good luck with it. Let us know how it goes this weekend, and hope you have some fun. Thanks.